Why? Why are we doing what we're doing in software development? This is a question that has been bothering me for quite a while now. As I've been busy in the industry, there's been so many processes and so many guidelines and so many disciplines that we're supposed to follow. Clean code, TDD, Scrum, etc., etc. But whenever I actually examine these practices, like go to the source and read why we're supposed to do that, I never find any metrics, any way of qualifying or quantifying why these practices actually improve our software development cycles. There's a lot of promises and there's a lot of statements and claims and sometimes even arguments, but there's never any way of, look, you can convince yourself that this is true because you can measure X. And if X doesn't yield the improvement that I'm promising you, then don't do it. No. It's always just says, well, you should do it because it's best practices, and if you don't do it, you're doing it wrong. Now, even when you follow these practices and when you point out the problems because you measured some measurement, like let's say how long it took you to develop or how often you run into problems and bugs, then these gurus and practitioners always just point at you and say, well, that's because you're doing it wrong. What you did wasn't correct. You should have done it a different way. And often they follow it up with, here's a very expensive seminar for you to learn how to do it correctly. Now, the problem is that if you're going to have a guideline or rules on how to do things, and they're so easy to mess up that a lot of people constantly do them wrong when they try to follow them as prescribed, then what's the point? Then I might as well just not do them and deal with the problems directly. One such practice is story point estimation in Scrum. And what is a story point? Well, it's just some estimation of effort relative to the backlog of a story. What does that mean? Well, first of all, we are not supposed to relate them to hours. That is considered a mistake. And if we take a look at scrum.org, then we can find some articles, and it clearly states here that you should not matching story points to hours, because that's missing the point. And the reason for this is that we shouldn't use units of measurements, time as a unit of measurement. Because if you ask any two developers for the same task, how long it would take them to implement this task, they would give you two different answers. One would say, well, this would take me 4 hours, while the other one would say, well, 2 days. The problem here is, though, that ask any two developers how many story points a story has, and you'll find that they're very likely to disagree on that as well. At least in my experience, I've probably only agreed once or twice in my entire career on a story with the rest of the team as for how much story points the story should have. And I'm not the only one that disagrees. A lot of the team members just disagree. And we're already using the Fibonacci sequence, basically. So there's not even that many values to choose from, but we still disagree on, is this a 3, a 5, or 8? So why not just estimate two things? A average expected development time, let's say, would take us 5 days, and a risk factor on how accurate we believe it to be, because there's a lot of insecurities in it. So we could say, well, this is a high-risk story of 5 days, which might mean it might also take 10 days. Another argument is that velocity doesn't change over time. Sorry, story points don't change over time. The effort to implement a story would be constant. Well, that's also completely wrong, because if you implement a story now versus a story in a year, it's quite possible that a lot of the groundwork has already been done, which should change the effort that we think it needs to be implemented. So they're not even stable over time, just as work time isn't stable over time. Another argument is, well, you just estimate in story points, and that gives you a velocity of story points per sprint, and you can then use that to estimate how many stories go into a sprint. Now, this is complete nonsense if we're not supposed to use them as a measurement of time, because velocity is something over time, and a sprint is a measurement of time. It's usually 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 4 weeks. So when you ask someone, does this story still fit into the sprint? What we're going to do is look at the story, look at the estimated effort, and in our heads, translate that back into a measurement of time. Because we have to ask ourselves, does this still fit into these, 14 days? So when you ask someone, does the story with 5 story points fit into a 2-week sprint? You're really just asking, do you think you can do 1 story point every 2 days? If the velocity is also 5 in this case. And they also claim that the performance of a team will change over time. That is correct. But that means our velocity will change over time, while the expected effort for a story will also change with the team members, because maybe all team members are more experienced with that subject, so they all would be doing it faster. But then they would also agree all that it's a lower story point number, probably. And the story points are completely useless in the sense of estimating pretty much anything. We can't derive project costs from it. We can't derive delivery dates from it. We can't derive pretty much anything from it. Well, this is my opinion on story points. I find them a huge waste of time estimating them, and then we never use them, basically.